And now, Lord, sow the seed of thy word into our hearts and nurture it by thy grace, that it might bring forth abundant fruit in this place and in all places through Christ our Lord. Amen. Back in June, a pastor friend of mine was appointed to a new church and district about 60 miles from where he had been living and serving. And so he and his wife sold one house and bought another. And at first, they were very pleased with their purchase. They found just the right kind of house they were looking for, about the right price. They liked the size of the lot. It was on the corner, close to church, just about perfect. But then about a month after they moved in, they began to experience some upper respiratory discomfort. And upon investigation, they found black mold and green fungus and all kinds of nasty, yucky stuff in their crawl space near the HVAC unit, which has cost them a small fortune to clean up. And I haven't heard him exactly use these words, but I couldn't help but wonder if they might not be experiencing a little bit of what is sometimes called buyer's remorse. You know, when you question an investment that you've made. Well, in our text today, we're taken back to a situation that Jim mentioned in his sermon about 2 weeks ago. The prophet Jeremiah is in jail. Again. He'd been in jail before. King Jehoiakim had him placed in jail. This time, King Zedekiah has him placed in the court of the guards, the jail cell in the palace, and he's up on some pretty stiff charges, like insurrection and treason, things like that. You see, Jeremiah has preached this sermon on more than one occasion, probably in lots of locations, which, taken at face value for all practical purposes, could be interpreted as anti-patriotic against his country, the nation of Israel. And you know, there are texts in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, that were then and still are sometimes interpreted today as saying Israel belongs to God. And nobody is going to touch Israel under any circumstances, period. Jeremiah seems to not have read those scriptures, those passages, at least the part about under any circumstances ever. Because what has happened is this rumor has been circulating that Babylon and some other northern neighbors of Israel were going to pose a threat to Jerusalem and the nation of Israel. And Jeremiah says, that's right. That's right. Babylon is going to be a threat to Israel. In fact, their army is going to besiege us. King Nebuchadnezzar will have our king, King Zedekiah, stand before him in chains as a prisoner and take him to Babylon along with most of our population, and we will live as exiles in a foreign land for a long, long time. And God is going to let it happen because of our sin, because we have pursued foreign gods, strange gods, for so long. God is going to let us experience what it's like to serve them. Well, understandably, from a nationalistic perspective anyway, King Zedekiah found that that was not a message that he could officially endorse. And you have to remember, this is before the separation of church and state, right? Well before the separation of church and state. And so the typical order of things when a prophet would get out of hand like that was, first the prophet would be commanded to be silent. Then the prophet would be beaten up, maybe placed in stocks. And then they would be thrown in jail. And Jeremiah spent more time in jail than John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, or was beaten up more rather than John Wesley. You know, it's interesting that Wesley saw the purpose of Methodists to renew the church. And he would preach to people no one else was preaching to. And sometimes there were mobs that were actually hired by other priests in the Church of England who would beat the early Methodist preachers up. Just goes to show you they really did. The church did need to be renewed, didn't it? So Jeremiah had been beaten up, he'd been placed in stocks, he'd been ordered to be silent, he's placed in jail more than once. And then while he's in jail, and while everything that he had predicted was coming true, and the Babylonian army is besieging the city of Jerusalem, they've got it surrounded, you can smell the smoke, you can almost feel the torches that the soldiers are carrying. And he gets a visitor in his jail cell. His cousin, his father's brother's son. And his cousin has in one hand a deed and a real estate contract. In the other hand, he has a copy of the scroll of Isaiah 27, I think it is, either 25 or 27. And he says, hey, cuz, just kind of here on official family business, Dad has always noticed how you love that property we have out at Anatoth where you were born. And we've decided it's time to sell it. And according to Leviticus, as next of kin, you're obligated to buy it and to keep it in our tribe and family. So sign here, please. Now, to put that in a more contemporary context, that would be similar to being offered the purchase of a beautiful antebellum home, towards the end of the 19th century. Mansion, 5,000 square feet, porch that goes all the way around the house. Beautiful home, just as General Sherman and his army is arriving in downtown Atlanta, where this house is located. That would sort of be a similar type investment. You might have buyer's remorse. And it's understandable how Jeremiah might have about to be a buyer remorse, right? But he doesn't. He jumps at the chance to buy this land because he's gotten another message from the Lord. The Lord has said, Jeremiah, your cousin's going to come by and see you in jail. Buy the property, pay full price, because I'll tell you what, Babylon does not have the last word on the real estate market in Israel. And a lot of other things about Israel. I do. Buy the land and pay full price. I once heard former President Bill Clinton say that since the dawn of our nation, there have been those who have bet against America. And everyone who has come out on the short end of the wager. Now, it sounds a little bravado, I guess, but I like it, as someone who was born in America and plans to live in America a long time and hope my kids live in America. I kind of like the ring of that. Sounds good. But, God would have us to understand a much bigger picture based on our text today. God would have us to understand that ever since the dawn of creation and the dawn of time, at least according to our lesson in disciple class the other night, ever since the dawn of creation, there have been those who have bet against God. And everyone who does eventually discover that they come out on the short end of that wager. I can't prove that. I can't show you empirical evidence that would verify the claim. I just believe it. I just believe everybody who bets against God comes out on the short end of the wager. And Jeremiah did too, which is why he happily signed that deed for property which would be confiscated by the Babylonians before the ink would dry. And it turns out the land did return to Israel and to Jeremiah's tribe. Took a while, but God does have the last word in Israel, not King Nebuchadnezzar, not the Babylonians. During World War II, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a pastor in Germany, was part of a church alliance that stood against Hitler. And I won't endorse everything that Bonhoeffer did, but one thing that he did do that I find admirable and amazing was that he served as the director of an ecumenical Christian seminary during the days of Nazi Germany. So picture that. The German army, the Nazis, are goose-stepping all over Europe. They're besieging city after city after city, committing them to flames, taking over. And I can just imagine someone say, well, Pastor Bonhoeffer, what are you going to do about this situation? I'm going to be the president of a Christian seminary. Can you imagine? Excuse me, I could have sworn I just heard you say you're going to be the president of a Christian seminary. Yep, I did and I am. One that was formally and officially shut down by the Gestapo. And if anybody knows how to shut something down, it's the Gestapo, right? But Bonhoeffer said, I'm going to make sure it stays open. I'm going to serve as director because Hitler is not the head of the church in Germany. And the Nazis do not have the last word on my country. God does. Whew. I hope that I would have invested in that seminary if I lived in Germany at the time. I don't know, but I'm glad that Bonhoeffer did. But the truth is, every single day, every morning you wake up and throw your feet over the bed and land on the floor, you have amazing opportunities to invest in hugely significant things. Amen? We all get to decide how we will invest our lives, in what we will support. And so we come to church and Dr. Murphy asks us to fill out a survey matching our interest with opportunities for service in the church. You don't have to. But you know, it really does help us to be able to be organized and effective in our ministry if you do. We'll still love you if you don't, but it does help. And then, people like Reverend Touchton and Beth Morris and Kathy Jones and others asked us to invest in our own spiritual development and the spiritual development in others in Sunday school and disciple Bible study and other small groups Wednesday night together. And we have to decide, is that really an investment I want to make? And then people like, I'm going to pick on Fred again, then people like Mike Warren and Amy Foster and Fred Daniel make approaches, make appeals to support the scouting program. Girl Scouts and Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, to invest in young people becoming responsible citizens and leaders in our community based on Christian principles. But it gets crazier than that around here. It gets even crazier. Because people like that woman back there, Karen Alexander and Paul Givens and Lynn Paradis and others would have us invest in homeless children and women in our community, to provide them food, as Way of Hope does, and we will this Tuesday night. Provide them food and maybe even at some point shelter. Can you imagine homeless women sleeping on the floor of our church? By the way, one of the little children whose only home are the churches that open up their doors for him and his mom, said, you know, last Christmas, he slept on the floor of the church floor. He said, that was my best Christmas ever. Why? Because the church opened its doors. The church opened its doors, gave them something to eat, gave them a place to stay, maybe gave them a little stocking full of presence. But you see, it kind of gets even crazier than that, because those same people would have us go out and invest in the lives of those who have lost everything with floods and tornadoes and hurricanes. They load up tractors and bobcats and chainsaws, and they drive all the way to Oklahoma City and all the way to South Carolina. And I know the question understandably arises, whoa, how are they going to pay us back? If we're investing in their lives, how are these homeless women and children, how are these people who have lost everything down in Mississippi or out in Oklahoma, how are they going to pay us back? Well, you see, that is the beauty of this arrangement. Because God promises, as we have seen again and again and again in the Gospel of Luke, God promises, y'all, that when you invest in the lives of people who can't pay you back, and we're going to find out the answer to that question on the other end of that telephone call. Yes, we were just wondering, when we invest in the lives of homeless women and children and people who have lost everything, how does that work exactly? We're referring to a promise from God. What is that promise? The promise is God pays us back. That's why we exist. Now, I know in one sense that sounds like crazy talk. But you know, in the spirit of Bonhoeffer, in the spirit of Jeremiah, in the spirit of Karen Alexander, it just sounds like God talk. Just sounds like the kind of talk that the people of God speak. And you know, maybe what the world really needs is for the people of God to stand before King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians of our day and remind them, you don't have the last word. God does. You don't have the last word, Babylon, Iraq, Rome, whatever. God does. And isn't it great to know that we have an unselfish, gracious, loving God who has given us everything and wants to give us everything, who does have the last word. Isn't that great news? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.